In the heart of the antebellum South, on a plantation where secrets were as dangerous as the law itself, a friendship was about to be tested in ways no one could imagine. The sun had barely risen over the sprawling Georgia plantation when Harriet walked through the dew-soaked fields, her long dress brushing against the tall grass. She paused to watch Daniel, her young enslaved man, work the soil with quiet precision. He was clever, patient, and loyal, qualities Harriet admired more than she could admit. Daniel had been with her family for as long as she could remember, and over time he had become more than a worker. He was almost like family, though she knew the world would never see him that way. Harriet's best friend, Evelyn, was waiting by the edge of the orchard, a basket of freshly picked peaches in her hands. The two women had been inseparable since childhood, their laughter echoing across the plantation like a melody. To outsiders, their friendship seemed ordinary, but Harriet knew it was rare. Evelyn understood her in ways few could, and Harriet had always trusted her completely. That trust, however, would soon become fragile. "You know, Harriet," Evelyn said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I don't see why Daniel is always by your side. Surely someone as clever as him could be shared?" Harriet's heart skipped a beat. The word lingered in the humid morning air like a warning. "Shared? Evelyn, you know the rules. He belongs to me."
Evelyn's smile was innocent, but there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes. "I mean nothing disrespectful. I've always admired how intelligent he is. I thought it might be nice to have his company sometimes." Harriet hesitated. In that moment, she saw a familiar curiosity in Evelyn, one that had driven them into mischief as children, one that had sometimes gotten them both into trouble. Harriet wanted to trust her friend, but a part of her shivered at the thought of blurring boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. Yet the temptation to indulge Evelyn, to give in to the comfort of companionship and the thrill of secrecy, was too strong. "Very well," Harriet said cautiously, "but remember, nothing inappropriate, just conversation, that's all." Evelyn's eyes lit up, and she nodded enthusiastically, promising to respect Harriet's wishes. At the time, Harriet thought she had made the right choice. After all, what harm could come from a few innocent visits? Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn began spending more time with Daniel. At first, it was harmless. They would sit under the oak tree by the river, reading, laughing, and discussing the plantation's small happenings. Harriet watched from a distance, a sense of unease growing with every passing day. She told herself it was merely jealousy disguised as concern, but deep down she feared that boundaries she had trusted Evelyn to honor were slipping away. The plantation itself seemed to hold its breath. Other slaves exchanged subtle glances when they saw Evelyn's attentions toward Daniel. Whispers floated through the fields and kitchens, but Harriet tried to ignore them, burying her worry beneath layers of denial. In this world, appearances were everything, and the last thing Harriet wanted was a scandal that could ruin not only her reputation, but her family's fortune. One humid afternoon, Harriet found herself standing at the edge of the orchard, watching her friend and Daniel laugh under the swaying branches. A cold knot of fear tightened in her chest. She knew that the simple act of sharing someone, a human being, was not just a personal risk, but a dangerous challenge to the rigid rules of society. One misstep, one word overheard, and everything she held dear could be destroyed. Yet, despite the fear, a part of her could not look away. She had always believed in the strength of her friendship, the loyalty of Daniel, and the sense of control she thought she had over her world. But as the wind rustled the leaves and Evelyn's laughter rang out across the orchard, Harriet could not shake the sense that the choices she was making were weaving a web she might never escape. Little did she know, that single decision to trust her friend with Daniel would set in motion a chain of events that could destroy them all. What do you think Harriet should do next? Should she confront Evelyn or let things continue? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss where secrets and betrayal begin to surface.
The days grew warmer, and the summer sun draped the plantation in a golden haze. Harriet could no longer ignore the tension that had begun to creep into her once trusted friendship with Evelyn. At first, she had believed the visits between Evelyn and Daniel were harmless, a simple curiosity of her friends. But as the weeks passed, Harriet began to see subtle changes. Evelyn laughed a little too freely, lingering near Daniel longer than necessary. Her hands brushed his more often, sometimes lightly, sometimes with a casual intimacy that made Harriet's stomach tighten. Daniel, for his part, had grown quieter around Harriet, his eyes darting nervously whenever Evelyn was near. There was a tension in the air, a silent game of glances and unspoken words that Harriet could neither ignore nor confront directly. One afternoon, Harriet found herself standing at the edge of the orchard again, hidden behind a thick magnolia tree. She watched as Evelyn and Daniel sat under the sprawling branches, the sunlight flickering across their faces. Daniel's hands moved gracefully as he explained something, pointing toward the sketches of the plantation layout he had drawn. Evelyn leaned closer, her laughter soft but eager, hanging on every word. Harriet felt a pang of jealousy she couldn't shake. "Is this what I've allowed?" she whispered to herself. She had trusted Evelyn, perhaps too blindly. She had told herself that a few innocent conversations could never hurt anyone, but now the air itself seemed charged with a forbidden energy. That evening, Harriet confronted herself with the truth she had been avoiding. Evelyn's curiosity was no longer innocent. Something deeper, more dangerous had begun to take root. The thought of losing Daniel, of him being drawn closer to Evelyn, filled Harriet with fear and anger. But fear, as Harriet knew, could be more dangerous than anger. If anyone discovered what was happening, the consequences could destroy more than just friendship. They could destroy lives. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread across the plantation. The slaves, always observant, noticed Evelyn's unusual attentions toward Daniel. It started as subtle glances, then quiet comments in the kitchens, and finally, hushed warnings exchanged among those who worked in the fields. The tension thickened like smoke, but Harriet tried to maintain a facade of calm. She smiled politely, answered questions, and acted as though everything was normal. Yet every laugh she heard from Evelyn under the oak tree felt like a threat to the fragile balance she had worked so hard to maintain. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Harriet finally confronted Evelyn in the parlor. The air was thick with heat, and the smell of peaches lingered from earlier that day. "Evelyn, I need to ask you something," Harriet said, her voice trembling slightly. Have you been trying to get closer to Daniel than I allowed?" Evelyn's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then she looked Harriet straight in the eyes, unashamed. "Harriet, I admire him. Is that wrong? He's brilliant, talented, unlike anyone I've ever met. I don't mean to cause trouble, but he makes me feel alive in a way no one else does." Harriet's blood ran cold. She had expected curiosity, perhaps even infatuation, but not this. Evelyn's words were bold, dangerous, and almost reckless in their honesty. Harriet knew then that her trust had been misplaced. The secret she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers, and she feared the consequences were far greater than she could imagine. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Harriet left the parlor with a heavy heart. The orchard, once a place of comfort, now felt like a battlefield. She realized that her friendship with Evelyn and the life she had carefully built was now on the edge of a cliff. One wrong step, one slip of the tongue, and everything could collapse. Little did Harriet know, the real danger was not just Evelyn's feelings or Daniel's loyalties, but the eyes of the entire plantation. Secrets like these, no matter how carefully guarded, never stayed hidden for long. What would you do if your closest friend betrayed your trust like this? Would you confront them or stay silent?
Comment below with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss where Betrayal begins to unravel everything Harriet holds dear.
The oppressive heat of the late summer weighed on the plantation, but Harriet's thoughts burned hotter. She could no longer ignore the tension between Evelyn and Daniel. It had grown into something she couldn't define, yet feared with every fiber of her being. The trust she had once placed in Evelyn now felt like a fragile thread stretched to its breaking point. One evening, Harriet stayed later than usual in the parlor, pretending to review household accounts. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the flicker of candlelight beneath the orchard door. Curiosity, or perhaps dread, pulled her silently outside. Hiding behind the thick branches of an old magnolia tree, she saw something that made her heart stop. Evelyn and Daniel sitting close together, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of a lantern, whispering in hushed tones. Harriet strained to hear, but the words were almost impossible to catch. Yet the intent, the intensity in Evelyn's eyes spoke louder than words ever could. Daniel's hand moved slightly, brushing against hers, a gesture Harriet had never witnessed before. It was subtle, but it was enough. Betrayal cut deeper than she had imagined. She wanted to confront them immediately, to demand explanations, but a shiver of fear rooted her to the spot. The plantation was a world of rules, a world where appearances were everything. Any slip, any hint of scandal could ruin her family, ruin Daniel, and ruin Evelyn herself. Harriet had to be careful. One wrong move, and lives could be destroyed. Days passed, but the image of Evelyn and Daniel under the lantern never left Harriet's mind. Every conversation she overheard, every glance they shared, seemed like a secret-coded message she wasn't supposed to understand. She tried to keep herself composed, but jealousy and fear gnawed at her. Could she confront Evelyn without exposing herself? Could she trust Daniel to stay loyal? The questions twisted in her chest like a storm. It wasn't long before the rumors started to spread. Whispers in the kitchens, fleeting comments from the fields, and knowing looks from the other slaves made Harriet increasingly paranoid. Someone had seen them together, perhaps more than once. The fragile balance of control she had believed she had was crumbling. Finally, Harriet could no longer bear it. She sought Evelyn in the parlor late one night, determination shining in her eyes. "Evelyn, I know something is happening between you and Daniel," she said, her voice low but firm. "Tell me the truth. Have you been crossing the boundaries I set?" Evelyn looked at her, a mixture of defiance and guilt flickering across her face. "Harriet, I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but feelings, they can't always be controlled. I care about him, more than I thought I would. I never wanted to hurt you." Harriet's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "Do you even understand what's at stake? Our reputations, our lives, his life." Evelyn's gaze hardened, almost as if challenging Harriet to stop her. "I do, but what you fail to see is that he matters too. He has feelings, thoughts, desires. You treat him like he's nothing more than property, Harriet, but he isn't. He's alive, he's human, and he deserves to be seen." The words cut Harriet to the bone. Evelyn wasn't just betraying her trust, she was challenging everything Harriet had ever believed. The confrontation left a crack in their friendship that could never be mended. Harriet realized that the situation had escalated far beyond her control. One misstep, one word to the wrong person could set off a chain reaction that would destroy everyone involved. As Harriet left the parlor that night, the moon casting long shadows over the fields, she knew that the danger had only begun. Betrayal wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a force moving quietly through the plantation, and it was about to strike. Do you think Harriet should forgive Evelyn or take action before it's too late? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell.
and the consequences of betrayal are about to explode in ways no one saw coming.
The morning sun rose over the Georgia plantation, casting a warm glow over the fields, yet Harriet felt nothing but a chill in her bones. The confrontation with Evelyn the night before lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Betrayal had settled between them like a stone, heavy and immovable, and Harriet realized that their secret could no longer be contained. It started with subtle changes. The other slaves, who had once avoided gossip, now exchanged glances when Harriet and Evelyn passed. Some whispered behind hands, others paused mid-task to watch, and all of them seemed to sense that something forbidden was happening. Harriet could feel their eyes everywhere, pressing against her back, judging her, silently warning her that the delicate balance she had tried to maintain was slipping. By midweek, the rumors had reached the ears of the plantation owner. In a world governed by appearances and control, no hint of impropriety could go unnoticed. He summoned Harriet and Evelyn to the main house, his presence cold and commanding. The women's hearts pounded as they entered the grand hall, its polished floors reflecting the harsh light of the early morning. Every step echoed, a grim reminder that their lives hung by a thread. "Harriet, Evelyn," the owner began, his voice firm, "I've heard troubling whispers about behavior that is unacceptable. Explain yourselves." Harriet felt a tightness in her chest. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. She glanced at Evelyn, whose face was pale but defiant, and realized that the friend she had trusted implicitly could no longer shield her from the consequences. Evelyn spoke first, her voice steady but laced with a tremor of nervous energy. "Sir, I have spent time with Daniel, yes, but it was never meant to dishonor anyone. I admire him, his intelligence, his character, but I never intended harm."
Harriet's stomach dropped. Admiration? That word could be twisted in so many ways. The owner's gaze shifted sharply to her. "And you, Harriet, you allowed this to happen?" I thought it was harmless at first," Harriet admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never imagined it would escalate." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet heavy with fear. The plantation owner's eyes narrowed. In that world, even a hint of disorder was enough to punish anyone involved. "You understand the severity of this," he said. "This is not just a matter of friendship or loyalty. It is about control, propriety, and the law of this house. Such behavior cannot be tolerated." Harriet felt a cold sweat bead on her forehead. Every lesson she had been taught about obedience and appearances now pressed down on her like a vice. Evelyn's defiance had put them both in danger, and Daniel, loyal, silent Daniel, was at the center of it all. The owner left them with a warning, his shadow looming over them like a storm cloud. The weight of judgment pressed down, and Harriet realized that nothing would ever be the same. The orchard where they had laughed, the fields where Daniel had worked faithfully, and the parlor where secrets had been whispered, everything had become a stage for suspicion and scrutiny. That night, Harriet wandered the halls of the main house, thinking of Daniel and Evelyn. She knew the delicate balance of trust had shattered, replaced by fear, anger, and resentment. One misstep now could mean ruin, not just for her and Evelyn, but for Daniel as well. Their fates were intertwined in ways Harriet had never anticipated, and the choices she made in the coming days would determine who would survive this storm. The shadows lengthened across the plantation, and Harriet understood one chilling truth. In a world built on secrets, betrayal, and control, the smallest action could have the largest consequence, and the consequences of this betrayal were only beginning to reveal themselves. What would you do if your life and the life of someone you cared about were on the line? Could you forgive a betrayal, or would you act to protect yourself? Comment below with your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell, and the tragic consequences are about to unfold.
The storm had been brewing for weeks, though no clouds had yet gathered over the plantation. Tension hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and inescapable. Harriet knew that the fragile thread holding their lives together could snap at any moment. She had hoped that time would mend the rift with Evelyn, that reason might prevail, but she was learning that betrayal, once set in motion, rarely waits for forgiveness. That evening, the sky finally darkened, clouds rolling in like silent witnesses to the impending chaos. Harriet found herself in the orchard, watching as Daniel and Evelyn spoke in hushed tones beneath the same oak tree where laughter had once flourished. She clenched her hands into fists, a storm of emotions raging inside her, fear, jealousy, anger, and sorrow, all tangled together. Harriet could no longer remain silent. She approached them, her voice trembling but firm. "Evelyn, Daniel, I cannot allow this to continue. You are both crossing boundaries that cannot be undone. If this is discovered—" Her words hung in the humid air, unfinished, but the threat was clear. Evelyn looked up at her, a defiant spark in her eyes. "You don't understand, Harriet. You never have. He is more than your property, more than your possession. He has a mind, a heart, a soul." Daniel's gaze shifted between the two women, conflicted and fearful. He had remained loyal, but the tension had worn him down. He wanted to appease both women, to avoid the storm he sensed coming, but storms are rarely polite.
Harriet's voice shook with desperation. "I trusted you, Evelyn. I thought our friendship meant more than this, but you've put all of us at risk. Do you understand what this could mean? For Daniel, for me, for everyone?" Evelyn's expression softened, but only slightly. "I do, and yet I cannot deny what I feel." The confrontation escalated quickly. Words grew sharper, emotions flaring like sparks in dry grass. Harriet's fear collided with Evelyn's defiance, and Daniel, caught in the middle, could do nothing but watch. The shouting carried across the fields, a storm of its own that the slaves and workers could hear from afar. It was inevitable that someone would notice. A neighbor, passing by the edge of the orchard, had already begun to spread rumors. The plantation owner, already suspicious from previous whispers, would hear soon. Harriet realized the moment had come. Consequences were no longer theoretical. The first repercussions struck swiftly. The plantation owner summoned Harriet, Evelyn, and Daniel. Panic coursed through Harriet as the owner's eyes swept over them, calculating, unforgiving. Punishment was not merely possible, it was inevitable. Evelyn's defiance, Harriet's hesitation, Daniel's very presence, they were all factors that could lead to ruin. The punishment, when it came, was harsh and immediate. Evelyn was sent away from the main house, confined under strict supervision. Harriet faced warnings and threats to her family's standing, and Daniel's fate became uncertain, hanging on the edge of fear and obedience. In the aftermath, the orchard felt emptier, colder. Where once laughter had echoed, only silence remained. Harriet walked alone, haunted by what had transpired. She realized that trust, once broken, can never fully be repaired. Evelyn's ambitions and desires had set off a chain reaction, and the consequences would echo far beyond the immediate punishment. Even in the stillness of the night, Harriet could hear the echoes of that day, the clash of words, the betrayal, the fear, and she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. Friendships destroyed by betrayal, lives altered by ambition, and a young man caught between loyalty and desire. The story was far from over. Could Harriet have stopped the tragedy before it began? What would you do if faced with betrayal and danger like this? Comment your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, and the final chapter will reveal the shocking consequences for everyone involved.
The plantation had changed. The laughter that once rang through the fields had vanished, replaced by whispers, wary glances, and the heavy weight of fear. Harriet walked slowly through the orchard, her mind replaying every decision, every moment that had led them here. The betrayal, the confrontation, the punishment, they had all come together like a storm she could neither stop nor escape. Evelyn, once her closest friend, was no longer by her side. Confined and watched, her defiance had not diminished, but the reality of consequences had finally forced her into submission. Harriet could feel the absence of her friend as a hollow ache. It was a reminder that even the strongest bonds could shatter under the weight of desire, secrecy, and ambition. And Daniel remained, but he was different. The spark of ease and laughter that had once defined him was replaced by caution and quiet observation. He moved through the fields like a shadow, always alert, always careful. The freedom to be himself, even in small ways, had been stripped away. He had survived, but at a cost Harriet knew she would never forget. Harriet's heart ached with guilt. She had trusted Evelyn, thinking their friendship could weather anything. She had underestimated the consequences of allowing a human being to be treated as a possession, even in the twisted logic of the plantation. She had allowed curiosity and loyalty to blur the lines, and in doing so had unleashed a chain reaction that destroyed not only her friendship, but altered lives forever. The other slaves, silent observers of the drama that had unfolded, whispered their own lessons. The story of Harriet, Evelyn, and Daniel became a cautionary tale, passed from one to another in hushed tones. It was a reminder of the dangers of betrayal, of the fragile nature of trust, and of the destructive power of desire, unchecked by conscience.
Harriet spent long nights reflecting on the events that had brought them to this point. She understood now that intentions, no matter how pure, could lead to devastation when mixed with ambition and human weakness. Evelyn's desires had collided with the harsh realities of the world they lived in, and Harriet's blind trust had allowed it to escalate. And yet, there was a lesson in the ruin. Harriet learned that vigilance, clarity, and boundaries were not mere suggestions, they were survival. She realized that even love and friendship, when entangled with human desires and societal constraints, could become dangerous forces. The orchard, the parlor, the fields, every place where laughter and whispers had mingled would forever bear the memory of what had happened. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the plantation, Harriet walked past the oak tree where it had all begun. She placed a hand on its rough bark, a silent promise to herself. She would never again allow trust to be blind, nor friendship to be tested by ambition without caution. The echoes of betrayal would remain, but so too would the lessons learned. In the end, Harriet, Evelyn, and Daniel were forever changed. Friendships destroyed, lives altered, and innocence lost. They became a story whispered through generations, a reminder of the fragile balance between trust and ambition, desire and loyalty. The plantation continued, but nothing would ever be the same. What do you think was the most tragic moment in Harriet and Evelyn's story? Could any of this have been avoided? Comment your thoughts below. If you've been captivated by this tale, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. There are many more shocking historical stories coming your way.